Today I'm going to be doing a wrap-up video talking about all of the books that I've recently read. So some of these books I read in December and some of them I read in January. I just didn't do a December wrap-up because first of all I only read 4 books. Also I wasn't here at my house at the end of December. Just never got around to it. So I've combined my December and January wrap-ups, but I'm also only talking about books I have something to actually talk about because there are a couple of books in December that were just like okay and they've not really stuck with me, so I'm not going to go through those, but I've got loads of books here. I do have some really good books to talk about, so I'm gonna do that now. First one that I wanted to chat about is The Cursed House. I read this at the beginning of December because I was kind of in a horror mood. This book is set in, I think, the 60s or 70s, so it's historical. Sorry to all the older folks out there. It's historical fiction set in the South, and the main character has been living in the north. I can't remember whereabouts, I think Illinois, and she applied for a job as a nanny for a family in the South. She's leaving behind an ex-boyfriend, a family who she's not really connected with, and also a friend, but otherwise she's not really got anything going on up in Illinois. So she's quite happy to go down to the South and start a new life there, living in this rich family's home to be a nanny for them. She gets there and it's not exactly what she expected. It's in fact not a nannying job at all. And the family actually wanted her for a different reason. I'm not going to say what that reason is, but needless to say, it's a huge surprise for the main character. But she doesn't leave because she's got nothing else going on. She's got nowhere to go, and the family do promise to pay her very well if she does what they ask. Also very important to the story is that the main character is black. You can probably tell by the cover, and so a black woman going from a northern state down to a southern one, it's a very, very different living situation, especially because the family that she is going to stay with are white. They say that they have black ancestry and they're not like other white people, but the main character can't tell. Their skin is fairly pale. Most of them, if not all of them, have blue eyes. They've got lighter coloured hair, so they definitely don't have the same life experience as the main character. And where the horror stuff comes in is there are ghosts in this house, and the main character is able to see them. She has always been able to see ghosts, and people have judged her for it. Not many people know, to be fair, but people have judged her, and this may have something to do with why the family called her down there. I thought this book was very well written. I think it's a debut. I will correct myself when I'm editing if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly sure it is. It's a really interesting story. I really enjoyed the historical aspect of it, of a black woman living in the 60s/70s and how she was being treated at that time. I thought it was a really good setting as well because it helped the main character, or helps the author, isolate the main character, because obviously there are no mobile phones, there's no internet. She's going to this house alone, and it's not in a town either, it's along a very quiet road in the countryside. So she is very isolated and abandoned. In order to post anything, she has to go all the way back into town, obviously, and so she has very little connection to the outside world, and so she is just surrounded by this family and she has to very much depend on them. So I really enjoyed reading about that. I really enjoyed also the paranormal horror aspect as well. Some scenes were very creepy. I'm not particularly bothered by ghosts. I think it's because I spent years watching Supernatural and I know how to deal with them. I wasn't like horrified by any of the scenes, but some of them were sort of like jump scary. The whole history behind the ghosts of the house and the history of the family, I found that very interesting, the way all of that was interwoven. You kept finding out secrets. I did think that the main character just sort of accepted things a little bit too easily. The family were definitely keeping secrets from her pretty much all the way through the book, and at some points the main character didn't really go digging anymore. She was just kind of like, oh, they'll tell me at some point, I'll figure this out eventually. And it's kind of like, we're reading a book where you're meant to be figuring this out, otherwise what's the point in this story? So I wanted her to be a little more proactive with that, even though it would have been difficult because the family didn't want to tell her anything. There were some relationships in here that I found really interesting as well. Motherhood is a big theme, and the relationship between a mother and a daughter. I think the book is a little bit too long. I feel like towards the end it did start to drag it a little bit because similar things started to happen over and over again, and I feel like that could have been a little bit condensed to just get to the point to really keep the momentum going up until the ending. But overall, really solid book, really enjoyed it, and if it is a debut, if I'm correct, then I'm very impressed. So I gave this one 4 stars. Also in December, I read Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone by Benjamin Stevenson. This one is a crime mystery set in Australia, but it's not set anywhere warm. It's set in the snowy mountains, and this is about a main character whose name I can't remember. He is going to a family reunion in this snowy mountain hotel. You learn in the first chapter that the main character's brother, I should probably learn their names, otherwise everyone's gonna get so confused, but I genuinely can't remember. The main character, his brother killed someone, and then the brother asked the main character for help. So the main character obviously is not okay with this, that's not an okay thing to do, and the main character turned his brother in, and his brother has been in prison all of this time. And so that means that he has a very complicated relationship with his family because they're not very happy that he turned his own brother in. And as the title says, everyone in his family has killed someone in one way or another, accidentally or on purpose. So this is the kind of mystery book that you know going in there will be clues throughout the book, and so you can try and figure out. You end up reading into every little thing, every little interaction. There's a note from the main character to the reader in the beginning that goes through all of the rules of a murder mystery. So if you really want to, you can keep referring back to it. I didn't bother in the end. I just got a bit too invested in the story to keep jumping back and forth and looking at the rules and trying to figure it out. I really enjoyed the isolated setting of this one, but I don't think it was really a massive factor. It was important for the plot, but it wasn't really an atmospheric setting for me. I enjoyed reading about all of the inter-family relationships. I thought that those were quite amusing, and the author's voice as well, the main character, was very amusing. This is written as though the main character is writing his own book. That's not always a style that I gel with. I find it a bit cringy sometimes, but in this case it was actually all right. The humour though, it wasn't really my sense of humour. I'm very, very picky with humour in my books. Quite often it just doesn't click with me, but it was all right in this one. Overall, I gave this one 3.5 stars, I think. It's the first book in a murder mystery series as well. I assume they're somewhat connected, but it's got the same main character, but the next one is about a bunch of authors who are stuck on a train together, and I'm very intrigued by that one. This one was just an okay first book, but I think because I wasn't too impressed by the humour, I didn't find this as charming as I think a lot of people have. So it's good, but nothing amazing. I also listened to Dinner for Vampires. This is Bethany Joy Lenz's book. It's a memoir, and it talks about how she was captivated by a cult basically while she was also on One Tree Hill, the TV show. I don't have loads to say about this one. I thought it was very good. I think I gave it 4 stars. She narrates it herself, which I really liked. I always like it when authors do that, they can narrate their own book. I did find it very sad that she got so sucked into this cult, partly because she was trying to be a good Christian and she'd been taken away, or she'd moved away from her biological family, and she was swept up in this cult family instead, because I think she was, as she said, I think was just looking for connection and her own sort of bubble, I think, and that was very hard for her to find. And then in the end, the cult wouldn't let her expand that bubble or find new people to connect with. They very much kept her isolated, which was the opposite of her goal. I thought it was very well written, very well narrated, so I definitely recommend it if you don't mind reading things like this. I understand some people don't. I wanted to read it because I watched One Tree Hill when I was younger, and I sort of follow what the main cast are doing now, apart from Chad Michael Murray, because I still don't like him. And I had considered listening to Bethany's podcast that she also had or has with the people who play Brooke and Peyton, and they talk about their time on the show, specifically, not their like personal lives or anything, and how the showrunner was an absolute arse. In this memoir, Bethany doesn't go into any of that. She talks about the show itself a little bit, but it's more about how the cult was affecting her time on the show and with her castmates rather than the time on her time on the show itself. So don't go into this book expecting anything about like One Tree Hill. It doesn't really talk about it very much. And then I also wanted to talk about The Crimson Moth, which was my final sort of book of the year, and I gave it 4 stars. It's a YA fantasy book. Could also be considered romantasy, but to be honest, it doesn't feel any different to any other YA fantasy book that has the romance sort of thrown in there, because that's been a thing in YA for years at this point. So this is about a woman or a girl who is a witch. She was forced to turn her witch grandmother in to the witch hunters in order to save herself. Her grandmother told her to, so she didn't betray anyone really, but everyone thinks that she did, and that has kept her safe. No one else knows that she's a witch, apart from 2 people, her friends. Can't remember their names, I think Alex and Verity? One's definitely Verity, can't remember the guy's name. They are aware of her witchy goings on, but everyone else thinks that she's like a rich, silly socialite who doesn't really have any brains. So by night she goes by the Crimson Moth, and she has made it her mission to save other witches from the witch hunters, because she wants to make up for what she did to her grandmother, because that was really quite traumatic, and she also just wants to save witches because they shouldn't be being killed, to be honest. The other main character is a witch hunter. At the beginning of the book, he goes after a witch and imprisons her. Can't remember her name, Stephanie, something like that. The Crimson Moth wants to free her. So she has to get close to Gideon in order to get information. But Gideon also wants information from her because it's suspected that she might be the Crimson Moth, but he has zero evidence. So they're both trying to get close to each other in order to expose some secrets, get information. So they're meant to be using each other, except they both really quite like each other. So it doesn't go too well. I think this one is really thrilling. It's very action-packed. I really like the twists. I thought the romance was good. I wouldn't necessarily ship the characters, I don't think, but I'm really picky about my romances now. I just didn't really feel much chemistry, but that's fine. I still really enjoyed the book. I gave it 4 stars because it was a really interesting time, and I really like the world building as well. I've seen a lot of people complain because the witches, or this witch in particular, has to use her own menstrual blood for the spells because she can't get blood anywhere else, otherwise it might expose her for various reasons. I won't go into like the whole lore, but basically witches can use their own blood for spells, but if they do, then their skin scars, and if the witch hunters were to find out, they'd see the scars and they'd know that person's a witch. They can also use other people's blood, but they need their consent, so it's safer for her if she uses her own blood without cutting herself. The people who've been kicking off about this, like, I don't think it's really a big deal, but people are really quite angry / disgusted. But you know, she's trying to survive. You've got to do what you've got to do. So I really like this one, and I'm really thrilled that Rebel Witch is coming out in February because that means I can read it almost immediately and finish up a duology if this series doesn't get extended, which I'm a bit worried that it will because it's really popular. But I really enjoyed this one, so I'm very pleased. Okay, and then moving on to January, I read 4 books in January because I was away in the first half of the month, and in the second half I was like settling back into work and stuff, so it wasn't the best reading month for me. But to be fair, I did read some really big books, so I'm not really disappointed with my reading. I actually had quite a good time. So the first book that I read in January and also in 2025 is Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez. I received this one for free from the publisher via NetGalley in exchange for an honest review. You all know the drill by now. This is another romance book by her. I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 because it's not my favourite by her. I feel like it could have been a little bit more in depth. This is about a main character, can't remember any of their names, I'm sorry. There are 2 main characters, a guy and a woman, and she has a mother who has dementia. She's also got 2 siblings, a dad and nan, and she meets the other main character who is a guy. He's a vet, seems a bit socially awkward and unfunny, but they meet, they go on a first date, and then he finds out that she is moving to California, which is from I think Minnesota or something, so like miles away, and neither of them can really afford to do long distance right now, and she can't afford to stay in this town that they are living in because she is going to live back with her family to take care of her mother. So it's kind of like a long distance relationship sort of thing because they do want to continue seeing each other, and that's the main issue in their relationship. It's the main drama. The male main character is also dealing with abusive parents who he has gone no contact with, but they keep finding ways to like creep back into his life. So there are some heavier topics in this one. It didn't feel quite as heavy as some of her previous books, just because there was some distance between the parent-child relationships. He has tried to go no contact, and as I said, they do keep creeping back in, but for the most part his parents aren't around, which is good. It just, they feel like they're just sort of looming there, ready to like pounce whenever. Again, she is living with her parents, but the dad is dealing with so much stuff. His wife has dementia and it's obviously really upsetting, and then the mother has dementia, so she's not really herself, so there's sort of like disconnect there as well. And so I found that it wasn't quite as heavy for me to read about. I'm sure it will be super emotional, super sad for so many other people. This is just a personal thing. What I did really like about this book was their relationship for one thing, but also the animals. They both really love animals. Obviously he's a vet, and I just wanted them to start up their own little animal sanctuary together. It would have been absolutely lovely. I feel like both of their individual personalities could have been a bit more developed because I don't really know much about either of them apart from she really likes mustard and animals, and he just really likes animals, and I think that's about it. He likes music as well. I think he gives her a CD, so I feel like they could have been a bit more developed for me to really get on board with them. But overall, a very good book by Abby Jimenez as usual. Very readable, really enjoyed it, and I think everyone else will as well. It comes out in April. I read Queen Bee by Juno Dawson. This is the novella in the world of Her Majesty's Royal Coven. It talks about the start of the coven, so it's based in King Henry VIII's court. It starts up just as Anne Boleyn has been beheaded, but then it also jumps back to when the main character, whose name I can't remember, meets Anne Boleyn. And Anne Boleyn is a witch and she is actively trying to get into Henry's bed, basically. But the complication is that she and the main character start to fall for each other, and everyone knows that it's super dangerous to try to go after Henry because he's still currently married and doesn't really care. She's not really the main character of this one, it's her love interest. I really wish I could remember names, or I had looked them up beforehand. So the timeline sort of jumps back and forth. In the timeline after Anne has been killed, the witches are trying to find the witch who betrayed her because someone turned her in. I don't typically love short stories and novellas unless I'm really invested in the characters, and while I love the Her Majesty's Royal Coven series, none of the characters show up in this one. Obviously it's set like, what, 500 years before they're born, so they're not around, so I don't really have anything to like latch onto here. So I only gave it 3.5 stars. It's probably more of a 3, but I'm gonna go 3.5 because I did enjoy it. I did keep reading. There weren't any points where I just put the book down and kind of forgot about it. I was actively invested. I just didn't really care about any of the characters because it was 500 years ago. They were all dead, and there wasn't time to really get into the nitty-gritty about any of them. I did really enjoy Joanna Dawson's author note at the end though, giving a bit of context to the real history behind it all. And I really liked the fact that Queen Elizabeth, the first Elizabeth, she made a slight appearance in this, and I thought that was really cool because I find her to be a very interesting historical figure. And then this next one, I'm not going to talk too much about it because I have done a whole review, and that is Onyx Storm. So I gave this one 3 stars, but really it's more of a 2.5, but I rounded it up to 3 on Goodreads. This book was very much just fine. As I said, I've done a whole review on it, so I won't go into too much detail. It's the 3rd book in the Empyrean series. It's a filler book. Very few things actually happen. This is another one where it's just not in depth enough for me at this point. By a 3rd book in a series, I would be expecting deeper conversations to be happening. The characters should be sort of getting to a place where they're going to make their final stand, but this one is written in such a shallow way, I don't really feel it was necessary because it doesn't add loads to the story. Like, we find out bits and pieces, but for example, there is a villain who's introduced in this one who hasn't been seen before, and I don't think they're going to be a big deal afterwards either. So we're very much just brushing past that. And by the end of this one, we're very much in the same place where we thought we were at the end of Iron Flame. So this book just feels completely unnecessary, and the middle of the book felt like a bunch of short stories as well. And as I just said, I don't love short stories, but a good chunk of it, I would say like 200 pages, was just the same repetitive short story feeling journey, travel, adventure. I didn't really feel like much of it was high stakes either, which is a shame. So I'm very disappointed by this one. And go and watch my review if you want to know more feelings. I don't spoil anything in that review, but there are spoilers in the comment section. So I'm disappointed by this. I keep putting off recapping it. I meant to be working on a recap today, but I just can't be bothered. Between me and my friend, we have recapped maybe half of the book, and I just can't be bothered to continue. So I will write up a recap in the next couple of weeks or so and then record one for YouTube as well. But it's taken me a while because I'm just not as invested as I was before. And then I read a book that turned out to be one of the worst books that I've ever read. And so January didn't end particularly well for me. I read Quicksilver and it was honestly atrocious. I don't judge people for giving this 5 stars. Like, do what you want. I'm glad you're enjoying it. But this is, I don't understand it. I don't understand what you're doing. This is, as I said, genuinely one of the worst books I've ever read. It's, let me back up. It's about a woman called Ceres who lives in like a desert sort of country. She's very much poor, lower class, living in the slums, and the people of her world are restricted for water. The queen controls all the water, and Ceres people don't get much at all. I think they get like 1 cup a day or something. Ceres does have powers that she is keeping a secret. She can manipulate metal in some way. At the beginning of the book, Ceres steals a gauntlet from one of the queen's soldiers, and they're obviously understandably quite angry at that, and so they try to track her down. They ended up coming across her brother instead because her brother is called Hayden. He's a bit hopeless, and he was carrying the gauntlet. He had it on him when the soldiers came across him, and so they threaten him, but Ceres gets involved. She takes down a bunch of the guards or soldiers and then is arrested, taken to the palace. While she's at the palace, a portal opens and this hot, wet, dripping guy comes out and takes her through the portal. So she's taken from her homeland, and it turns out that he is Kingfisher and he's taken her to the land of the Fae. Ceres previously had heard of Fae, but she thought it was all just stories. She didn't realise they were real. So she has a lot to learn in this new country or land. Other than that, I couldn't really tell you loads about the plot. There's a war happening. The king is an arse. Kingfisher, which is his whole name, like the bird, he has an attitude problem, and I don't think it's a very attractive attitude problem either. Sometimes like I can deal with like snarky, I really like snarky, but he is just miserable and depressing. Every time he spoke, I just wanted to put the book down because I could not stand him. I don't like the ship at all. There is another character who I do really like. His name is Carry-On, which is the most stupid name also, but I don't think he's going to be the love interest. I think it's very much going to be Ceres and Kingfisher, and I just could not take them seriously. Ceres is meant to be, in one moment, a badass fighter who takes down a load of guards, but she's also meant to be constantly dehydrated and weak. But then she also has to take fighting lessons. She is also not very intelligent, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but she did have to have things constantly explained to her. And the way that the author explained things was in conversation and with info dumps. When Ceres needed to find something out, she'd go and talk to, for example, the palace librarian, and he would give her the full history of this fey kingdom, including like so many little details that she never asked about, but it's so that the reader could find out some things. And it was just done so poorly. The writing in this was honestly atrocious. The banter between Ceres and Kingfisher was absolutely awful because, again, he was miserable. I also don't know why his hair was always dripping wet. You should probably have that scene too. I really can't think of anything apart from Carrion that I enjoyed about this book. Any scene that he was in, absolutely fantastic. He lit up the room. But other than that, I didn't like it. I gave it 1 star. It's one of the worst books I've ever read. If you want me to recap or review this one, let me know, but that's going to be quite painful for me, so I'd rather you didn't torture me that way. But I might do a recap anyway, just for fun. I am really sad because I had seen the hype and I didn't trust the hype necessarily, but I'm always open to hype. But I shouldn't have been open about this one because it was shit. Also, this cover is a 1-star cover, I would say. Why does his tear glow? And why are there pink butterflies on here? I don't know. I get the impression that the author wanted to jump onto the romantasy hype train, and she knew that fae typically did really well because it's the only freaking creature that ever shows up in these apart from vampires. But she did not do a good job with this. It was awful. I think she needed to sit on this for another like year or so and really like plot it out because it was badly written. Nothing important happened. It didn't need to be 600 pages. I can't believe I read 600 pages of this. Just what was I thinking? And especially for a couple that I really do not like. So yeah, that was my experience with Quicksilver. And that is the end of my January/December wrap up. They weren't the best couple of months with reading, but I entertained myself at least, so there was that. February is already off to a much better start. I've already read a 5-star book, so I'm looking forward to telling you all about that at the end of the month. But otherwise, that's it from me. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these, what you thought of them. If you've read Quicksilver and liked it, tell me why. And as I said, feel free to leave your Onyx Storm thoughts in the comments below. But if you want to spoil anything, maybe go over to my review and leave spoilers in those comments instead. So thank you for watching. Tell me what your favourite book of January was in the comments below, and I'll speak to you all in the next one. Bye!